But right now we're in a bad situation. This came out a few years ago. I recently found out that it doesn't apply to Kentucky where I am. 90% of Americans not meeting the goal of just 2 to 3 cups of vegetables per day. Turns out Kentucky is more like 96%. And getting back to the idea of healthcare disparities being, they are driven by diet. According to University of Alabama, Birmingham, the Southern dietary patterns, which the regards trial, racial differences in stroke, they actually looked at survival over a 5-year period and the number of events that were happening with the bad diet. By the way, Southern diet is just another way of saying soul food, high in sodium, high in fat, the fried chicken, the putting fat back in the greens. Yams are great, but candied yams are not so great because adding sugar and refined grains are actually going to be actually worse than eating animal products. What do we get from our Southern diet? Much more heart disease, much more kidney disease, and more strokes. So the next issue that we have is our fast food prevalence. It's everywhere in the country. Everybody's doing it, but they tend to gravitate toward the poor areas because that's where they make the most money. And when you supersize it, people come back for more. It changes your appetite. And so one of the major problems that makes that happen is the success of advertising. If the advertising didn't work, people wouldn't do it. And this is a study we published a couple of years ago where a couple of investigators actually watched television. And we got up to 104 commercials and that had food in them and just wrote down, was it something healthy, something unhealthy? So, the lettuce and tomato on that hamburger, that double cheeseburger with bacon on it, get overwhelmed by the refined grain in the bun and the French fries next to it, the 2 different kinds of animal protein, plus the supersized soft drink. And so ultimately, we are marketing things that really increase mortality. And we've tried talking to regulators about this because we were successful in getting a ban on cigarettes, but so far that hasn't happened. So if you look at the food that we're being shown on television, it's really highly addictive food. It promotes unhealthy patterns of eating, the obesity epidemic that we'll talk about, but ultimately there are other places, Canada and European Union, who have decided that we're not going to sow this kind of stuff to our kids, and they are better off because of it. Hopefully, at some point, we will do the same. Okay. Right now, we're stunned by this by the University of Chicago, where they took a look at poverty versus middle-class people versus people making more than $150,000. How much television do they watch? And the graph is just very telling. So these television commercials that are really promoting unhealthy foods are actually going to the poor and making our healthcare disparities even worse. So I'm going to talk more about the cardiovascular risk factors and what it is that we could or should be doing about each one of them. And because the data is really clear, obesity has to be listed first because it's growing so rapidly in this country. If you look at the number of states that overall have more than 35% of people obese, Kentucky is certainly one of them, one of the most obese states in the nation. But the fact of the matter is, this number is actually growing. Now, if you were to isolate just the Caucasian population, yeah, still Kentucky, but it's only a small number. It's only 6 states out of the union. If you went for the Hispanic population, we have much more central obesity, more diabetes. They still have a longer life expectancy than whites, but that probably has to do with faith and family and things that have nothing to do with the physiology because they're a sicker population. So you could just stop and say, when you hear about the Hispanic paradox, is Hispanic paradox a good thing? It's good that they're alive, but they're suffering more amputations, long lives of illness. So that isn't great either. So perhaps there are some changes that could be made in that population as well. Last but not least is the African American population, where there are only a handful of states that either don't have blacks in large numbers or they're obese more than 35%. And so when you talk about the racial disparities and Hispanic paradox, it does not apply to African Americans. That is, obesity in African Americans is increasing the amount of mortality. It's dramatic and it's increasing. So what can we do about it?